Hello everyone, and welcome to today's SANS Analyst Program webcast, Insider Threats and the Need for Fast and Directed Response, sponsored by Spectrasoft. My name is Benjamin White with the SANS Institute, and I'll be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Dr. Eric Cole, Analyst and SANS Curriculum Lead for Cyber Defense, as well as an instructor, and Mike Tierney, COO for Spectrasoft. If at any point during the presentation you have a question for Dr. Eric Cole or Mike, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We will answer them during the Q&A session at the end of the webcast. And with that, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Dr. Eric Cole.
Thank you, Ben, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone today. I love doing these type of survey calls because surveys are really good to help people understand the problem. Help them understand they're not in it alone and see what else is happening across the industry. However, surveys typically just go in and show you about the problem or exposure. What's great about our format is I'm going to take about 30 minutes, explain to you the problem set that's out there and the challenges that organizations have dealing with this new exposure insider threat. I shouldn't say new, it's been out for a long time, but it's starting to get more awareness. And then for the second half of the presentation, we have Spectrasoft that will actually tell you about real solutions that you can deploy today to be able to fix the problem. So we're not only just telling you what the issues are, we're actually going to give you solutions that you can deploy to be able to minimize the exposure. When we talk about insider threat is not new. If you go back hundreds of years, there's always been issues with governments and companies and organizations having folks on the inside wanting to cause harm. However, one of the recent changes that we need to be aware of is we see a big shift from the old school deliberate malicious insiders, people that are actively trying to cause harm, and that's always going to be a threat. Every few years we see this pop up. From Robert Hansen, Aldrich Ames, most recently we have Edward Snowden, so that's always going to be a concern for organizations. However, the one that's really been rearing its ugly head is the accidental insider, somebody who's tricked or manipulated into doing something they normally wouldn't do if they knew the true intent of the actions. And this is an evolving problem because attackers are always going to look for the easiest way to get into an organization. And as organizations have locked down servers, they've built strong perimeters, they've put up DMZs, it has become harder and harder for an adversary to break into a server. So now, what is the easiest point of exploitation? Targeting a user on the inside and tricking and manipulating them into doing harmful action. So as we go through these results, I want you to keep thinking to yourself, okay, how well does our organization do against both deliberate malicious insiders, which is typically the focus for many organizations, but also how well would we do at catching or detecting the accidental insider? What if somebody was tricked or manipulated? Would our organization be able to deal with that challenge? Now, giving you an overview of the survey. So to the good news, bad news. The good news is organizations are recognizing that insider threat is a big exposure point. They recognize that most of their security was built up with a perimeter. That perimeter could easily be breached, and people within the organization with access are typically the ones that are causing damage. And the important thing that we have to make sure we recognize is when we look at the threats today, we need to differentiate between the source of a threat and the cause of damage. Because when I talk with lots of my customers, I hear them always go, oh, but Eric, most of the attacks are still external. Governments and competitors and foreign entities are targeting our organization. Yes, the source of many attacks today are external. However, the cause of damage is often the insider threat. So a lot of organizations miscategorize the real issue. A lot of APTs, advanced persistent threats, many companies falsely would put in the category of external, but most APTs, what is the cause of damage? Targeting an insider to either click on a link or open up an attachment to be able to cause harm. Typically, the big delivery mechanisms for especially accidental insiders are email clients and web browsers. Those are where we want to look at, monitor, control the entry point, and then be able to look for pivoting, lateral movement, and other exposures. So that's the good news. Organizations are recognizing that insider threat is a big problem. The concerning factor with the survey is many organizations do not realize how bad it is. Many organizations are not catching or finding their true damage because they're still looking for visible type activity in their network. And with traditional software like firewalls and IDSs and IPSs, maybe you'll catch the deliberate insider, but very often accidental insiders, the attack is crafted in a way to bypass and get around those solutions. That's why we need to look at the problem differently and not only use what we have more effectively, but also look at third-party solutions like Spectre 360 that are designed specifically to dealing with this problem. So the good news is awareness is up. Organizations still are struggling with a solution. We know there's a problem, but we really don't know what to do about it. And the other one that really caught my interest is many of the survey respondents said, we're not really spending any money today on insider, but we are in the future. Right? Over the next 2 to 3 years, we plan on spending a lot more on it, but today we're not really doing a lot. So we're sort of at the age of awakening where organizations recognize the problem, but they're not necessarily deploying solutions to deal with it. So more specifically, many of the respondents are really still focusing on non-technical controls. I want to be careful here. I am a huge, huge fan of awareness. Awareness is critical. Awareness is important. It is a fundamental part of a security program. However, with the advanced attacks targeting your insiders, in most cases, awareness is not going to help you here because they are getting what they believe to be legitimate. If you receive an email that you honestly believe came from your boss, you're going to open the attachment. All the awareness in the world isn't going to help you. If you're getting an email that you honestly believe came from a legitimate source, the awareness isn't going to work. Because essentially what happens is when that email comes in with that attachment, the user sits there and looks at it. And they have a little angel on their right-hand shoulder saying, don't click on it, don't click on it. And then the little devil on the left-hand shoulder is like, but it might be something cool. It might be something cool. And then the angel's like, don't do it. Awareness said don't do it. And then the devil's like, but it could be important. It could be from your boss. And guess what they do? They always open it. So this goes beyond awareness. We have to remove the vector. We have to take away the vector from ever making it to the user. And we have to check and track anomalies to be able to detect it much sooner. If you get compromised with an insider threat, that's okay. If you catch it within 30 minutes. If you catch it within 30 months, it's not going to be good. So it's prevent what you can, but detect, detect, detect. Now, in going through, and one of the benefits of being an analyst is I get to review all the results. And I agree with most of them. The one that I'm sort of going to wave my flag and sort of hold up and sort of call BS on is the one where most of the respondents said malicious insiders are a greater concern than accidental insiders. And the reason I'm doing this is I have worked on many, many large-scale incidents. I've worked on many, many cases where companies have lost significant amount of money, and in 98% of them, it's the accidental insider. In the last 12 months, I have worked on 32 cases that are accidental insiders and only one that's a deliberate malicious insider. However, the deliberate malicious insider is easier to catch and find. So I think what that result is really telling us is that organizations are still in their infancy in terms of dealing with insider, and they're catching the easy stuff, which is the malicious insider, and they're missing that accidental insider. The other thing that I completely agree with that really honed true is it's taking way too long to detect attacks. We have to do a better job of controlling the damage. So if you look at the survey respondents, they actually came from a lot of different organizations. If we really go in and look at it, it's probably more respondents from small to medium-sized organizations, which once again drives a lot of the findings that we're still in the early stages. Organizations are starting to become aware of the challenge. Now, when we go in and you assess whether you're vulnerable to insider threat, here's some of the questions I want you to think about. I'm just going to go through the survey pretty quickly, just giving you some of the color commentary, high-level areas, but I want you, after this talk, to listen and, to read the entire report, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. And the questions I want you to ask yourself, let's say right now, you're an adversary. You're an adversary and you want to cause harm to your organization. What would be the information you would target? What is the information that somebody knowledgeable about your organization and business would target and go after? Then, where does that information reside, and how would you go about doing the attack? Actually walk through this attack. Go in and look at what are the different ways that you can access the information, how would you extract it out of the organization, and how would you ultimately cause harm. And I bet you most of you are going to come back with targeting an insider, going after an insider, and causing harm to the insider. And then here's the real question. Does any of your current security devices prevent or detect that? If you tricked, compromised the system, mimicked, and took over the profile of a legitimate person who had access, how would your current security be able to deal with that? And that's how you start fixing it. Look at where we start putting more energy and effort on focusing and fixing this problem. It shouldn't surprise you, based on what we've said so far, that negligent employees are typically the biggest cause. If you go in and look at the biggest payout in companies today from insurance, it's actually not attackers, it's actually E&O, errors and omissions, mistakes that are made by people within the organization. When you go in and start looking at what's the damage, of course, it's what executives care about. What are basically the two things that are going to get your board rivaled up? What are the things that could impact your company and that are going to be ultimately concerned to your CEO? First, fines, regulations, or loss of operating capability, basically any regulated data. So it shouldn't surprise us that 67% are basically concerned about regulated information that forces disclosure to the public. And of course, that's directly tied to reputational impact. What is the impact to an organization if they get known for not properly protecting their information? Now, the reputation one, I'll be honest with you, is real interesting, because if you look at over the last 18 months, there's been several publicly traded companies that have had fairly significant breaches that were tied back to insiders, yet short term, there wasn't any immediate impact on their stock, which I know sort of left a lot of us scratching our heads going, well, wait a second. I mean, what's going on here? If this organization had such a significant breach and you had such a big exposure, you would expect to see a bigger hit in their stock prices when they did their quarterly reports, but we haven't yet seen that correlation, and the prediction of most of us is it's a longer-term reputational impact. You're going to see flattening in the market. You're going to see if they get reinfected. You're going to see their response and how they react to it. But still, from an executive perspective, that reputation is up there, but I think the exposure and harm to the customers is going to continue to be the big focus area. In terms of losses, this is the one that I was really, really surprised with. Look all the way to the right. Unknown. Many organizations are not able to quantify just how bad the damage is. And that goes back to our detection. If you don't detect it, how do you know what's really happening, and how do you know the net impact to the organization? I often tell many of my customers, insider threat is the silent killer. It's going in and it's causing harm, but many organizations just don't understand the exposure. And here's the issue. If somebody goes into your organization and copies critical information, what's really the financial impact? You don't really know. Well, our product didn't do good. Well, maybe it wouldn't have done good regardless. So because it's more copying and extraction of information and more on the confidential side, it's often harder to directly associate costs to the organization, but typically it is fairly significant. Now, the other one that sort of shows why this is a big problem is many organizations are not putting budget against insider threat. It's sort of just mushed together with everything else. And here's the exercise I'd like you to perform. Look at your organization, look at what you've purchased over the last 5 years, put it in a spreadsheet, and determine what technology is focused on external and what technology is focused on internal. Then look at what's happened over the last 5 years and where most of the damage is happening. When we do this for most of our customers, one of the recent ones we did for a pharmaceutical organization, they were spending 75% of their budget on external and 25% on internal. Problem? 80% of the damage was internal. So my question to them is, why are you spending 75% of your budget on 20% of the problem? Or better yet, why are you only spending 25% of your budget on 80% of the problem? So I'm not saying external is not important. I'm just saying we need to balance it out. Are we going in and spending money in the right areas? Is the amount of money proportional to the amount of damage that's in place? You can minimize the exposure and frequency of insider threat, ever completely prevent it. So this is one of those where prevention is ideal, and you should do what you can, but detection is a must. Now, important, if I have a preventive device and I'm stopping adversaries, I can see that. I can go in and say, yup, I prevented 20 malicious executables from making it into the organization. That is measurable, and that's why you see a high percent on the prevent side of the house, is because that's where most of the energy is focused on. But let me ask you a question. If you don't have a lot of outbound detection, if you're not monitoring user activity and you're not looking and catching for anomalies, you're thinking everything's fine. You're going to come back and say, yep, we didn't really detect a whole lot of insiders. It's not because it's not happening. It's because you're not looking in the right area. And that's what I'm real excited. I went through the slide deck last night getting prepped for this webcast, and I love the stuff that Mike's going to tell you with SpectraSoft and Spectra 360, because he's focused exactly on that. How can we do a better job of detecting, finding, and catching those anomalies? How can we complement the existing security to catch the things we're missing? Because that's really the big thing that came out of this report for me, is organizations are still trying to prevent. They're still believing they can stop this threat, and unfortunately, they can't. You should do your best, but some are going to get in. When we look at the tools and techniques that are in place, it's an integration. People alone are not going to be able to get the insider. Processes alone and technology alone. You have to have them all integrated in place. You have to build baselines. You have to have that part of your automated process. You have to be able to look for and catch those anomalies, and then you have to go in and be able to respond to those in a timely manner. It is outside the scope of this survey, but a direct area related to catching, detecting, and dealing with insider threat is having a SOC or Security Operations Center. In order to be able to deal with the insider threat, you have to constantly be monitoring your organization. You have to constantly be looking at it 24/7. And I know many folks go, Ark, there's no way we can do that. Exactly. That's why outsourcing is a key component. In terms of why are organizations struggling with the insider threat, it comes back to training. Our folks don't know what to look for. A lot of the people that we have in place are trained for dealing with traditional attacks, virus, worms, even advanced threats, but they don't know how the insider works, how to actually be able to look and catch and what to look for. And the big thing I can tell you is baseline and look for anomalies. Baseline and look for anomalies. I don't care how good the adversary is. They are going to deviate from normal user behavior. Whether it's a deliberate insider or an accidental insider, there will be deviations of behavior that you would be able to trigger on and catch and be able to find that adversary. 51%, more than half, trust their tools and techniques. Now, I'm not trying to go in and start trouble here, but the question I have, what test cases were actually run? What validation did you actually perform in the enterprise? Because this is very consistent with what I get from my customers. And remember, surveys are great. You can read the survey. So what I'm trying to do is not just read the survey. I'm trying to be a little provocative. I'm trying to get you to think. I'm trying to just sort of dig at it a little bit to get your mind wrapped around this to say, are we really doing what we should be? Have you tested? Have you actually gone in and done simulated insider threat exercises against your organization? Many companies today still do traditional pen tests. They're still hiring companies to try to break into their servers, to try to go in and look for open ports and services. Okay, that's not the big threat. Why aren't you doing insider threat pen tests? Why aren't you going in and doing what adversaries are doing, targeting the users, trying to go in and see who clicks on what? A lot of these fish me campaigns. Now, you got to do advanced style, but when our clients do these, they're blown away at how many people, even after awareness, will still go in and click and open those attachments. And to me, this is where you start winning. If you want to start winning, it's all about detection. Getting compromised is okay if you control the damage. The reason why all these large companies have made it in the news over the last 18 months is not because they got compromised. It's because the amount of damage that occurred. So are you monitoring your outbound activity? If somebody broke in to an internal system and started doing lateral movement, moving deeper and deeper into your organization, would you be able to catch it? If somebody broke in and set up a C2, a command and control channel, would you be able to detect it? That's how you have to look at the problem. If an internal system got compromised, how would you know? If that system started moving and causing damage to other systems, how would you know? If they set up an outbound command and control channel, how would you know? That's the level of detection you have to have today. If you have that level of detection looking at internal and outbound traffic, you're in good shape for dealing with the insiders. If you can't go in and focus on that, that's where the problem set occurs. And then just to reemphasize that insider threat is still in its infancy in most organizations. They still don't have full budgets. They're focused mainly on prevention. They're not doing a ton of detection. And this is sort of the final nail in that coffin, is many organizations do not have incident response plans specifically focused on insider threat. And reason why this is so significant is with a traditional attack, if somebody breaks in to a server on your DMZ, you can trace back the damage pretty easily. Maybe they got into the web server, maybe they compromised the middleware server, maybe they got into the database server. The problem with insider threats is you could potentially have 10,000 systems that have users that might not make the right decision. So if one user makes a bad decision, what do? We fix their system. What about the other 9,000? What about everyone else? That's the problem. For incident response to be effective, eradication or fixing of the problem is a critical step. And if you're not going in and putting in solutions that stop other people from a similar entity, that's where the problem is. And this is the one that I'll just be honest with you. I think, and I'm not trying to be mean here, but this is just a lack of awareness. I will tell you, I have worked with a lot of companies. I teach thousands upon thousands of students a year, and I will tell you, this is just not true. 66% of organizations have not experienced an insider attack. That is false. The correct statement there is 66% of organizations have not detected an insider threat attack based on the solutions they have in place today, but organizations are getting exposed. And what I always say is, just because you're not seeing it does not mean it's not happening. It just means you're not looking in the right spot. And let me throw another data point. When we work on incidents that are directly tied to insider threat, what is the average length of time that organization's been compromised before usually a third party detects it? It's typically 15 months. And it's typically a third party like law enforcement. Most of the advanced insider threat cases, it's typically law enforcement calling customer calling us. So it doesn't shock me that 66% say, hey, we haven't caught anything, because many organizations aren't structured or set up to do that. And most of the large-scale incidents, it's a third party after 15 months of compromise before they recognize there's an issue or exposure point. And this starts getting in to the heart of the problem. We've seen a wide range of organizations where some, and it's a small group, are saying they're catching it within an hour. But once again, just playing devil's advocate, are you just catching the easy stuff, or you're catching the advanced stuff? We don't know what we don't know. No one can look me in the eye and tell me you are catching 100% of all insiders. You just can't, because you don't know what you're missing and you don't know what's happening here. So I'm just telling you from doing a lot of incident response that a lot of this is really based on visibility of what people are seeing. It's not all the stuff that's being missed and that organizations are not catching. And once again, that's why we need solutions like the Spectre 360 that give us that visibility. Organizations do not have enough visibility into their organization. And then once again, we're seeing $5 million worth of loss, but that unknown, right? Companies just don't know what they don't know, and they don't know how much they're missing. But even with unknown being that high, we still saw $231 million worth of losses. So that's pretty significant when even the minimal that are being caught is still causing significant damage. So just imagine how much damage is being caused that isn't being caught, that we're not catching because we don't have that visibility. And there's always new tools that we can use, but with most of our customers, you already have a lot of the tools you need. You're just not tuning them correctly. If you want to go in and prevent what you can with insider threat, you need to be blocking executables. You need to be blocking embedded content in web links. There's lots of solutions out there that will sandbox, verify, and validate any content that could be dangerous before it comes into the organization. Then in terms of detection, outbound, look at what's leaving the organization. Look for anomalies in the amount of data. Look for any changes in length of connections, number of connections, location of connections. If all of a sudden a computer starts having a significant number of connections going to IP addresses that it never communicated with before, that is indication of a problem. Set up the proper use cases in your security, incident, and event management solutions. Finally, lock down that system. I know it's not scalable in all enterprises, but application whitelisting. If the adversary is going to take control of that system and get longevity, if you do application whitelisting, that's going to control and contain the amount of damage that's there. So go in, and it's moment of truth. Give yourself a report card. Go in and ask yourself, how effective? I'm not asking if you have them. The problem with a lot of the bullets on this slide is most companies do it from a checklist compliance perspective. Do we have a policy? Check. Do we have training? Check. I'm asking you, is it effective? If I walk around to your organization, do your users know what the policy is, and are they properly following it? Do people actually have the skills they need to accomplish their jobs? Do you actually have the right technology? So when I'm saying giving yourself a report card, A is great, F is bad, the report should be on the effectiveness of the solution, not whether it exists or not within your organization. So as I wrap up my section, and we will have some time at the end for questions, perform damage assessment. Think like the adversary. Go in and say, how would an adversary compromise our organization? Build out those attack models. See where the exposures are. See what you currently have in place to better prevent dangerous executables from coming in, and monitoring and looking for anomalies within your environment. Then perform gap analysis. Figure out where the gaps are, and then look at third-party solutions as a way to be able to go in and complement what you currently have in place. And an example of a technology, what you currently have to better detect and respond to the insider threat is SpectraSoft. So I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Mike, who's going to take you through some scenarios and show you how the solution works.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cole. And I've done a lot of these webinars, and I've been fortunate to be joined on several of them by what I thought were very outstanding presenters. But I think I'm going to have a tough time following. That was exceptional. I took more notes than I usually do on a webinar, and I feel a little bit like the guy, whatever his name is, that took over for Derek Jeter at shortstop this year. But that was great, and I appreciate the introduction. I want to thank everybody that's in attendance. It's been a great experience working with Dr. Cole and Sands. I've been very impressed with their expertise, their commitment to editorial independence, and the general passion that exists, throughout the member base and the response from the members that took the survey. So I'm going to try to follow up on what was an exceptional presentation and talk about the two central themes from the survey and from the report: the need to improve detection of insider threats and the need to improve response to insider incidents. For those of you that may be familiar with us, you might know that we've been talking about these topics for some time, and as Dr. Cole said, we're focused on offering solutions that help companies achieve goals in those areas. Probably not a huge surprise given that we're the sponsor. So why don't we jump in, and I'm going to start with one of the things that struck me most when I read Dr. Cole's report. That your organization currently has an insider threat of some sort is a near certainty. Therefore, you have to approach security with the assumption that an insider threat has already compromised you and focus your energy on detection. That's on page 12 of the report, and it really stood out to me. And he wrote the words that are up on the screen, say this 3 times, and it really struck a nerve with me. I also thought that there was some overconfidence maybe you can find on the same page of that survey, and it sort of echoes what Dr. Cole was saying. 68% of the respondents believe they have the ability to prevent or deter an insider incident. And I think that Dr. Cole did a better job than I could speaking about that. One of the things that got me thinking about, multiple studies and surveys by well-known vendors and respected experts have shown that something like 1 out of 2 employees take important, sensitive corporate data with them when they leave a company. 40% of those people say they're going to use it at their next job. I've seen surveys that say 18% admit to stealing a corporate intelligence. That means somebody asked them, did you steal corporate intelligence when you left the company? And they admitted it, which suggests the number is probably much higher. And since data theft and IP theft ranked very high in the list of concerns that the survey respondents called out, and we'll look at that a little bit in more detail, I had a question for the folks in attendance that are in that 68% that believe they have the ability to prevent or deter an insider incident. What's the track record that you guys have on dealing with the sticky fingers tendency of departing employees? Are you stopping them, or are you not detecting that it's happening when they're on the way out? And it's kind of one of the things that I got to thinking about. So let's talk a little bit about detection. Detecting insider threats requires visibility into insider actions. So let's start with figuring out just who are the insiders in our company. Insider is a pretty generic term, and at times it seems to have a somewhat elitist, maybe kind of a sinister association. So I went and I got a dictionary, and the dictionary tells us that the term insider applies to a person who belongs to a group or organization and has special knowledge about it. Well, there wasn't anything overtly elitist or sinister about that. It seems to cover, in my opinion, probably most employees or all employees and many times contractors pretty well. And clearly the people inside your organization know more about it than people on the outside. Merriam-Webster had a couple additional definitions. A person who's in a position of power or who has access to confidential information. Also they had another one who as an officer or director is in a position to have special knowledge of the affairs or to influence the decisions of a company. And I thought, what I took away from those definitions of an insider is that there are varying degrees of insider. The more inside, if you will, someone is, the more knowledge of the organization the person has. We're not just talking about senior people and DBAs, though. We're talking about everyone, whether they're accidental insiders or that deliberate malicious insider. So, once we establish that everybody in a company is an insider, then we need to start thinking about understanding or having knowledge of what their normal behavior is, what the normal behavior of an insider looks like, So you can identify anomalies in that behavior that suggest you may have a problem. And that's going to apply to, again, the deliberate malicious insider or the accidental one. Somebody who's been compromised or convinced or tricked to do something, their behavior is going to change, as Dr. Cole said earlier. So you need to have a system in place or a way of understanding what normal is and detecting those anomalies, and then you can use that information to drill in and quickly identify real distinct threats so you can respond to them. So we've established that insiders are people. We've established that we need to focus on their actions and their behaviors, and that's great, but where do we start? How can we put some structure around an insider threat detection program? Talk just a little bit about how all insiders aren't created equal. I think I used the phrase varying degrees of insider. So, as a kind of quick rule of thumb, at least into some insight into how I think, generally the more access someone has, the more risk associated with that someone. And the more risk, then the more visibility you need into the actions or the behaviors of that someone. Now, it would be very cool if everyone in your organization walked around with a little risk rating clearly visible above their head for everyone to see. On the assumption that that's never going to happen, then we need other ways to assess risk throughout the insider life cycle, or more common term, the employee life cycle. I saw in the report that the survey report that 74% of you are most concerned with employees versus only 17% that saw contractors as the biggest threat. So I'm going to focus where you as a community are saying we should focus and stay on the employee side. So risk, employee risk, insider risk, or whatever we want to call it, can be assessed and understood at the very onset of the life cycle by looking at the position someone's being hired into and the resources and the accesses that that position requires to perform its function. And you could come up with how much risk is associated with this position. So I would recommend that everyone look to add that step, the assigning of a risk rating or a risk level, to your process when you're going to go ahead and open a requisition or hire somebody into a new position. And remember, it's risk associated with the position, not the person. Your HR team, your interview team are weeding out, or we hope they're weeding out, the obvious people risks during the traditional processes that go around hiring. But the reason for this risk rating is it becomes part of a foundation of a threat detection program. It helps us to categorize users into kind of a higher risk pool and a lower risk pool. Now, for me, those are the two pools. I don't think there's a no risk pool because anybody could be compromised. Anybody could decide that they're going to do something in the best or not in the best interest of an organization. So anyone could fall into that class of an insider threat at some point. So we've got this base of employees or insiders. We want and we need to improve detection of threats emanating from this base. We saw back on slide 13 when Dr. Cole was presenting that policies and procedures are some of the top techniques that the community is using to prevent and deter insider attacks. And I think we saw that those probably need or certainly need to be augmented with technology. So when we take a look at some of the technological approaches that we can incorporate into our insider threat strategy to improve detection. So what am I trying to convey with this slide? It's a little bit busy. I apologize. On the left-hand side, under the user behavior analytics heading, and on the right-hand side under the user activity monitoring, those are the two classes of solutions that my company, SpectraSoft, offers, and the two that I'm going to talk about today under the broad, technological approaches term. What's in the middle of the slide here is kind of a stylized representation of risk ratings in an organization. So you've got some very low-risk folks, and then you've got some higher-risk folks, and I'm going to use a simplified 1 to 10 scale just to keep things easy. So what am I trying to convey with this somewhat busy slide? That user behavior analytics, and I may slip at some point and say UBA, I apologize in advance, which is a class of solutions focused on detection of insider threat by learning what the normal patterns of human behavior in the organization are, and then applying algorithms and statistical analysis to detect deviations from normal, and particularly deviations that suggest potential threat, should be deployed across your user base, whether you have classed a user as higher risk or lower risk. Because, again, anybody could at some point fall into one of the two buckets that Dr. Cole laid out, accidental or deliberate malicious insider. And then that user activity monitoring, the right hand of the slide, which is a class of solutions that that centers on the collection of very detailed contextual user activity data. Think about the type of data you can get from traditional logs and event logs, and multiply that exponentially. But if you focus strictly on the activity of a user, what other data is there available to you that has use? And there's a lot of it there. So a user activity monitoring solution is going to collect everything, focused again highly on the user and what they do, and then it's going to have alerting, reporting, search, drill down, probably even playback capabilities. And you should deploy that type of technology across your higher risk user pool. Because again, the higher the risk, the greater the need for scrutiny, the greater the need for visibility. Now you might want to apply user behavior analytics differently on a higher risk user than on a lower risk user, because we're going to apply that across our user base. You might want to look for smaller deviations, smaller anomalies on higher risk insiders because they're higher risk. You may want to employ these capabilities in different ways relative to the risk we're dealing with, focusing more, say, on data exfiltration potential on users that have access to trade secrets, IP, confidential plans, excuse me, and more on fraud-related activities on users that exist in areas that have been shown to have the highest rates of employee fraud, as an example. The key is you have a solution, your technology in place that complements your processes and policies, and that allows you to inspect what you expect, right? You can monitor for compliance. You can detect behaviors and activities that need to be quickly investigated and, if necessary, halted. Dr. Cole talked about mitigating the damage or containing the damage. So this technology, the combination of user behavior analytics, user activity monitoring, helps us know that our lower risk pool is in fact lower risk, or maybe we discover that we've classed someone incorrectly, and based on observed behaviors, we need to move them up into a higher risk pool and monitor them more closely. And it helps us to understand that our higher risk pool is not engaging in insider threat behaviors and activities, or if they are, we can detect them quickly and we can act. Now, a quick note on risk. I talked a lot about risk and risk levels. Risk moves, it shifts. It's kind of like the weather. It's predictable, except when it isn't. We've all been caught in the rain, even though we were good and we watched the morning news and they said it's going to be sunny today, and then you go out and get rained on. We don't want to get caught in the insider threat rain. So risk can shift over time. It can shift due to circumstance. Some of the causes of risk shifting are not going to be obvious or readily available to folks in information security. They're going to be things that are typically not exposed out to you. So some of the things down the right-hand side, for example, that people could be going through. Think about two people inside a company. Joe and Michelle, they don't like each other. They're both up for the same promotion. The one who gets it is happy. The other one, who perhaps does not like their rival that they now report to, is not happy. Now they're unhappy. They're disgruntled. That's a known precursor to the malicious type of insider threat. Who knows about this type of stuff? HR does. And it would be great if our HR team could simply alert the information security guys, or on the smaller end, the IT guys, depending on your size again, that the risk rating on Joe needs to be raised, and we need to keep a closer eye on him for a while. They don't need to explain why. They just need to say, raise it. And we've gone to the trouble now of assigning that risk rating at the beginning of the life cycle, so we've installed a system that is going to let what would otherwise be a difficult communication, because HR also has to be protective of employee privacy and the things that they know, and we've made it very simple. So, the one takeaway from this slide, my little deviation into insider risk, is don't lull yourself into a false sense of security because you have a good interview and background check process, because you took the time to assign risk to the position at the beginning of the life cycle. Insiders are people. People change. People get compromised. Risk shifts. So, back to some of the survey data, and I know that this was up on the screen earlier, but I thought it was important, so I wanted to bring it back up. Where should we focus first as we try to raise our insider threat detection game? Well, there's some great data that comes out of that survey, and as a community, you guys were most concerned with your data and it getting out to where it should not be. If you look at 4 of the top 5 responses there, and I circled them, they're all around what I generally refer to as data exfiltration. And the one that I didn't circle, the second one in from the left there, the reputation damage, if you read the report, you will see that that was reputation damage stemming from a breach or a leak. So it's all really about data getting out. So we want to focus the main thrust of our insider threat detection program on the behaviors that are related to data leaks and breaches and IT theft and exposure of confidential information. I can imagine the folks at Twitter are looking at that right now. And we should direct that focus on the insider and at the point where the insider interacts with the data. So the vast majority of the time, that interaction is going to occur on an endpoint. In a pretty incredible coincidence, my company, Spectrosoft, happens to make user behavior analytics and user activity monitoring software that operates on endpoints as well as on servers. So those things tie nicely together for me. So let's take a quick look at our user behavior analytics solution. And what you're looking at here is just one screen where you can go in and start to set up baselines so that you can detect anomalies. You can baseline a user's behavior against their own historical behavior or against the behavior of a peer group, or you can do both. What you're looking at up here are some of the behaviors that you can baseline and detect anomalies against, focused again on data exfiltration. So it's going to be pretty easy for somebody to establish that a sales rep who normally prints a document or two a week is suddenly printing hundreds of pages, or a developer who doesn't really use Dropbox is suddenly moving a bunch of files up there to a personal cloud solution in a very short period of time. And it's pretty easy to tune the software. It's actually as simple as sliding a bar to adjust how sensitive you want that anomaly detection to be. Tighter on some behaviors and users, losers on others. The tighter you set the sensitivity, the more alerts you'll see. What we tried to do is cover as wide a spectrum of the ways insiders take data out of company control, or data might make it out in the case of an accidental insider. And then we strove to create the software in a powerful and sophisticated enough way that it's going to work and scale for the enterprise, helping to feed very valuable data into a SIM solution, for example, but with enough of the complexity masked to make it accessible to smaller companies that don't have SOCs and SOC analysts and dedicated information security teams. So that is a very quick look at our user behavior analytics solution. It's called Spectre 360 Recon. But let's go back and take a look at our insider pool again a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about the higher risk insiders. So there's our higher risk pool up on the screen. It's certainly a smaller percentage of the overall population of your company than the lower risk pool. And some of the really eagle-eyed out there might have noticed that the gentleman second from the right had a lower risk rating when we first encountered him a few slides ago. But as we discussed, risk shift, behaviors change, and here he is now in the higher risk pool. So these folks require a bit more scrutiny than the lower risk pool, and we happily have a solution that can help you do that. So back to the somewhat busy slide. On those higher risk folks, we want to talk about user activity monitoring. We still want to keep an eye on their behaviors. We want to receive anomaly alerts. We probably want them tuned to smaller anomalies that we can detect. But now we want to add in that user activity monitoring. We need greater detail on their activities. We need to cross from looking for shifts in behavior to being alerted to activities as they occur. For those of you who are running a privileged account management solution, what's one of the things they all do? They log keystrokes, right, taking place in privileged sessions. That's a lot of detail on activity, every keystroke. But it's appropriate because every keystroke in a privileged session has the potential to do harm. Our software logs keystrokes, and they're often used for monitoring privilege use, but it's that type of detailed data on user activity that serves our detection goals. So we could add in things like event alerts, keyword alerts to the behavior anomaly detection, and that gives us a much greater ability to detect threats. And that's, again, it's appropriate on this higher risk pool, but it also helps to serve our response goals. I spoke at the outset when I got over my nerves of following Dr. Cole that there were two central themes: improved detection and improved response. Responding to an insider threat is different than responding to an external one. There are similarities, to be sure. We can learn how an external attack was propagated by looking at logs from a variety of sources, by looking at network traffic. Dr. Cole touched on it before. Historical flows are great for forensics. And with insider attacks, we can look at some of the same sources. Or if we have user activity monitoring, user behavior analytics solutions deployed, we can get our answers from one place. We need to have the ability to digest an alert, to use that information in and around the alert to identify a distinct threat, and then act quickly to shut it down. And then we can ultimately use some of that information as well to improve our security going forward in an effort to prevent, to preclude another similar attack. But we also need details quickly and in a format that's easy to understand. Because the insider threat involves people, in this case employees that we're talking about, responding to that insider incident is going to involve an extended team beyond the computer incident response team or the network admin group. You're going to need to engage HR. You're probably going to need your lawyer in the room. You're going to have some management in the room. If you have collectively bargained employees, you're going to have even more people in the room. And all of these are folks that are not used to looking at log data. So you've got to be able to show the extended team what happened in a way they can digest it so that you can deal with the issues associated with it. You know, one of the things that Dr. Cole called out was the surprisingly low number of companies that have incident response plans that account for insider incidents. I think that's an area that requires a lot of focus from the folks that don't have them, and I applaud the folks that have gone to the trouble of doing them because there is a difference there. Our user activity monitoring solution, Spectre 360, is going to give you the level of detail that you need. So in this case, and this is a little small on the screen, I apologize, but you can trust me that it would be very easy to see that a user, in this case it's a user named Tara O'Sullivan, was copying files, exactly what the files were, where she was copying them, in this case to a USB stick, and what's not viewable on the screen, but it's possible to play back the activity as it occurred. So it's pretty much like watching a show on a DVR. When you have this kind of detail in this kind of a format that's easy enough to understand, you get a very clear and very exact picture of who is involved in an incident, what they're doing, when the activity is occurring, how they're conducting the attack, where your data is going, and a lot of times you can also find out the why. Why did an employee do what they did? And that's going to be very important to help you determine the difference between accidental and deliberate and malicious. Having user activity data assembled by a user activity monitoring solution by Spectre 360 provides you with a lot of context. And that context can help from an evidentiary perspective, so you can punish the bad guys appropriately. But it can also help you be able to sit down with somebody and say, look, you made some mistakes and they caused a problem. So that's a little bit about Spectre 360 and the type of detail and the type of visibility that it provides. I mentioned briefly the punishing of the bad guys. And I wanted to just stop and talk about punishment for just a second because some of the questions in the survey talked about preventing or deterring an attack, and that word deterrence is an interesting one. And punishment can certainly have a deterrent effect. Others inside the organization who may have considered doing something may be given pause and choose not to do it. And that's the heart of deterrence, right? It's causing someone to not take an action that they otherwise would have. We didn't talk a lot about prevention other than to say that prevention is the ideal, but it's difficult, and that detection is the must. But there are things you can do to help prevent. Deterrence is a powerful form of prevention. So kind of to wrap up, deterrence can and should be part of your insider toolkit. Policies and processes can help you. Having good agreements that get put in place at the beginning of a life cycle and referenced at the end, confidentiality and intellectual property agreements can play a role there. Certainly punishing people who act intentionally to harm an organization plays a role here. But I'd like you to consider the effect of increasing the certainty that an insider is going to be caught. And we're more talking about the deliberate malicious folks here. But there's a lot of great research out there. A lot of it comes out of the criminal justice world that demonstrates that increasing the certainty someone will get caught has a greater deterrent effect than increasing the severity of the punishment should they get caught. Or in other words, the less I believe I can get away with it, the less likely I am to attempt it. So if you deploy technology like user behavior analytics and user activity monitoring, like Spectre 360 Recon and Spectre 360, across your organization, people are going to quickly realize things that they might have been willing to do, they can't get away with. So to wrap things up, if I can advance one more slide. Oh, maybe I can't. There we go. Leveraging a combination of user behavior analytics, user activity monitoring to give you complete coverage across your higher and lower risk pool is going to provide you with those powerful detection capabilities that you need. It's going to give you the detail required to inform response and can even help you a little bit with deterring insider threats from occurring. That was all I had to talk about. I appreciate everyone's attention and time, and I'm gonna throw it back to Ben, and that's it. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Mike. I'd like to say thank you both to Mike and Eric, both for your great presentation, and a special thanks to SpectreSoft for helping to bring this content to the SANS community. To our attendees, I greatly appreciate you listening in. I'd like also to announce the winner of the Amazon gift card that was chosen at random from users who completed the survey. Congratulations to Gary Deutschendorf. If you have any questions for either Eric or Mike that you were not able to ask, you can send those questions to q@sans.org and we will get those directed to the people that you've asked them to. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much and have a nice day.